Welcome to the Give Me Liberty podcast at the Standing for Freedom Center at Liberty University, where we defend life, liberty, and truth to ensure the foundations of freedom exist for the next generation. And joining me now is January Littlejohn. She is a parent advocate at the organization called Do No Harm. She's a licensed mental health counselor and an outspoken opponent of gender ideology. January, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Well, I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate what you stand for. I appreciate you actually using your voice and your story, especially the story of your daughter. What you experienced as a parent is horrific. And I want to talk at the outset a little bit about that to share your story with our audience. For those who are around the country, especially in places like Florida and Texas and other kind of red states, if you will, and they kind of live in that red band or that red quadrant, they might think, hey, you know what? This isn't really happening in my neck of the woods. It's happening out in San Francisco, or it's happening out in San Diego, or it's somewhere up in New York State or somewhere in Minnesota. But it's not happening in my neck of the woods because, you know, I'm in a red state. I'm kind of in this little bubble, in this little enclave. Your story is much different, and I think it's waking a lot of people up, and that's why I wanted you to come on and share that with us.
Yeah, well, thank you. You know, our story really started at the height of COVID in 2020. And at the time, there was very little information about what was truly going on under the guise of what's so-called gender-affirming care. And so our daughter had a friend group who was obsessed with LGBTQ identities. She was at the time in the 7th grade, and then COVID hit. And she came to my husband and I and told us at age 13, she no longer felt like she was a girl. And this was after 3 of her friends at school had started identifying as some form of transgender. And I think that what's important for your audience to know is the word transgender today has no coherent meaning. And we tend to think of it as people that identify as the opposite sex. They're experiencing distress over their sex. Historically, this tended to start in early childhood, but that is not what is happening now. And so the term transgender really means anything the child or teen wants it to mean. And so you start to hear terms like non-binary, gender fluid, demi-boy, demi-girl. And upon further research into these identities, you realize that children are being pulled or seduced into a false belief system where they are being taught that they have a so-called gender identity that is completely separate from their sex and that they choose to be a boy, girl, neither, or both. And so unbeknownst to us, our daughter had been seduced into this false belief system. She was vulnerable to this ideology for a variety of reasons, as most of these children are. But it was quite scary at the time because for her, her thinking was very black and white, similar to a child on the autism spectrum. She's both gifted and she has ADHD, which made her particularly vulnerable to this. She's always been very quirky, had a difficult time making and maintaining friendships. And so when she came to us and told us this was completely out of the blue. She had had no previous distress over her sex leading up to this announcement. And like so many adolescents, she was already struggling with the school shutdowns and being isolated and lonely and frankly scared about what was happening in our world around us. And so, like so many other times, my husband and I, we elicited the help of a counselor. I'm a licensed mental health counselor, but at the time, I wasn't really understanding what was happening. And so we got a professional to help us navigate this with our daughter. And over the summer, it started to escalate with her wanting to be called a different name and pronouns. She was asking us to purchase her a breast binder to bind her breast. She was talking very cavalierly about things I had never heard of, like puberty blockers. She was using euphemisms like top surgery. And so my husband and I were very concerned about her mental health and her future. And so we reached out to a teacher because school was starting in the fall. And you have to remember, this was the height of COVID. This was fall of 2020. So it was not a normal time where parents could go onto the school campus and have one-on-one conversations with teachers. And so I had let this teacher know that our daughter was struggling, that we were handling this as a family. We were not affirming the false identity at home. And I also let her know that I thought this confusion my daughter was experiencing was a direct result of her friend group. And a couple of weeks after school started, our daughter got into the car and said, "Mom, I had a meeting about my name today at school, and they asked me which restroom I wanted to use." So that propelled us down this path that has literally taken us to now in 2024. And it's been completely life-changing for us.
I wanted to kind of take a step back and ask this question. Was it in your experience and the experience of your daughter, was it just the school, or was this in some way induced by social media, by outside influences outside of that friend group? Was it teachers? Was it other counselors that she was speaking to? What was kind of speaking into? Where was she getting this information and maybe even some of these ideas? What was influencing that?
That's such a great question. And, I've spoken with hundreds of parents now that have had experienced the same issue with their children. So what I wanted to tell you is yes to all of those things dependent upon the child. For my daughter personally, she had been introduced to the ideology and to this idea that because she did not fit a stereotype of a traditional feminine girl that liked feminine things, that meant she was not a girl. And so for her, it came through her friend group. And even though we had restrictions on her phone and she was not allowed to have social media, they had full access to everything on the internet. So she was getting all of this propaganda through text messages. But what happens is and this is happening all over the United States, when a child goes to a school counselor or to a teacher, and this was here in Florida back in 2020, where all of this was blown wide open, they are trained to only affirm this false identity. And so what happened when my daughter went to the school counselor and said, "I'm transgender, I want to go by such and such a name and use such pronouns," that triggered what's called social transition of that child. So when my daughter got into the car and told me she had a meeting about the restroom, I immediately called the school counselor and demanded to know why they had a meeting with my child, why I was not included, and certainly why they were asking her which restroom that she needed to use, because they knew she was female. And it was just all very confusing to me. And so we went back and forth for about 7 weeks with the assistant superintendent, because the counselor had called me back with the assistant principal and said, "Mrs. Littlejohn, we cannot give you any information about the meeting we had with your child. Your child is now protected by a non-discrimination law." So they refused to give me any information about what was talked about with my child, anything. But 7 weeks later, my husband and I continued to push, continued to ask for legal justification that they were using to meet alone with our child without our knowledge or consent. And we were finally given an in-person meeting with the middle school principal, and we were shown the 6-page social transition plan that they had done with our 13-year-old daughter without our knowledge or consent. And let me be very clear, this was not just about names and pronouns. This was a 6-page document with 3 adults alone in a room with my child. And they asked her not only which restroom and locker room she preferred to use, but which sex she preferred to room with on overnight field trips. And then in this plan, which you can look up, it's from an organization called Gender Spectrum. These are being implemented all over the country. But they asked the child, "How should we refer to you when speaking to your parents? Should we use your birth name and pronouns or your preferred name and pronouns?" And this is to effectively deceive parents that these psychosocial interventions have ever even happened. So they are colluding with minor children to hide a psychiatric issue from parents.
Wow. That's incredible and how horrific. In regard to, I don't know if we said this at the outset, but this is not Berkeley, California. This is Tallahassee, Florida, correct?
That's correct. And like I said before,
yeah,
this had happened to other parents, but no one had blown the whistle on it. And so to our legislators' credit, as soon as they found out what was happening, Governor DeSantis and the other legislature acted very quickly to ensure this never happened to another family again.
So you're looking for a university that's perfect for you, a school that has anything you could possibly need.
Anything?
You want a place that has the programs you want to study, and maybe a few more, just in case you change your mind.
I think I'm going to sign up for the fashion design program.
All right. A place with state-of-the-art facilities. I mean, look at this campus.
And who doesn't love big-time sports?
And great recreational activities.
Okay, now we're on a roll. Somewhere you can hike, slide, strike, shoot, climb, eat, and most importantly, eat. You want a place that takes you to space? Okay, maybe not, but we can teach you how to fly, or pastor a church, or run a business. And all that with a great view? Yeah, I think I know a place.
So policies have been put in place in the state of Florida. Bills have been, I'm trying to remember the parental rights bill, the one that passed, I think it was in 2021, if I'm not mistaken. But it was targeting K through 12 education, and specifically of a certain age group. But I think even at the high school level, some of this is still permitted, is it not?
Well, so there was a lot of confusion. So in 2021, the Parent Bill of Rights was passed. The law that you're referring to is the Parental Rights and Education Law, and that was passed and signed into law in 2022. And at the time, it was so controversial, and there was such a small part of that law that talked about not teaching, there should be no instruction of gender identity, ideology, or sexual orientation for K through 3. We're talking about 8 and 9-year-olds and younger. And this became a media firestorm. Disney weighed in. I mean, it just became so much bigger. But that was good because sunlight is the best disinfectant. And prior to us coming forward with our story of what happened to our family, no one knew this was happening. There had been one other lawsuit, I believe in Wisconsin, where a group of brave parents anonymously filed a lawsuit against their school district, but no harm had occurred. So it was strictly on that policy alone. So it took us about a year to come to the realization that this wasn't going to stop without a lawsuit. Because when this initially happened, we still saw the school as a partner. I naively thought that if I show them the harm that's occurring, that I show them the research, I show them how anti-parent and anti-child this policy really is, that they'll want to do what's best for families. And clearly that's not what happened. So my husband and I did end up filing a federal lawsuit against the school district in October of 2021. That lawsuit was dismissed in December of 2022 by the judge, and we are currently appealing the judge's dismissal to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, and we are awaiting their decision.
Absolutely incredible. So, I mean, this pokes, a hole into kind of this narrative, this false narrative. Sometimes it can be a belief that some people have, but may not always be voiced, and that is that it's never going to happen to me. It's not going to happen to me, my child. It's not going to happen to my school district where I send my kids to school. That might happen to somebody else over there. I feel bad when I hear about it, but it's not going to happen to me. And you would just absolutely bang the gong and say, sound the alarm and say, you know what? Absolutely not. It can happen to anyone. And we got to be on guard. These cases are becoming more and more prevalent in our society. What do you attribute this gender ideology craze to? What do you attribute it to? We see it at the Olympics. We see it in popular culture. We see it on TikTok, on social media. It's everywhere. But where is this all coming from?
That's such a great question. And, let me be clear. I was volunteer of the year at this middle school. I was a substitute teacher in our school district. If it can happen to my family, it can happen to any family. But if you want to learn about the genesis of this destructive ideology, there are many great books available, starting with Ryan Anderson's book, When Harry Became Sally. That was banned in 2018. He was trying to sound the alarm on what was going to happen. People like Walt Heyer, a detransitioned man, had been sounding the alarm in 2018 and 2019, saying we are manufacturing these quote unquote transgender children by teaching this false belief system to children that they can be born in the wrong body. Another book that's fantastic is Queering of the American Child. It goes into what is queer theory and how did it get a foothold into our schools. And so when you see things like even Delta this week was saying we're no longer going to say ladies and gentlemen to be more inclusive, this is all queer theory in action. And it's really important that people start to stand up and push back against this, because this is anti-reality. And you can't divorce the fact that when you push this queer theory, what you're really pushing for is sterilizing children. They are chemically castrating children and cutting off the breast of girls as young as 12 years old in the name of this destructive ideology. And just yesterday, Leo Sapor with the Manhattan Institute came out and published a very important article on the American Surgeons Association that is no longer supporting this model of care for gender dysphoric children. We are starting to see this house of cards falling, because just until this happened yesterday, the US was an outlier on how we treat gender dysphoric youth compared to the rest of the world. And that's because of the CAS review and other systematic reviews that have shown countless times that the risks far outweigh the benefits for these medical interventions.
Yeah. You're pointing to the I think it's the American Society of Plastic Surgeons, right? They've broken kind of way. Yeah, that's right. And that's a positive development, more recent news. And so there is kind of this dam breaking, if you will, that's happening. And I think it's because, like you say, light is the best disinfectant, right? And so as more and more stories and cases are brought to light, we're going back to the Hippocratic Oath. You cannot commit. It's first a commitment to not do harm. This is the whole point behind medicine, is that medicine is to heal, whether it be the medicine applied directly to the body or even to the mind and the soul, right? That we are about the holistic man and woman to be healthy. I do want to go back to something you said earlier. And this is definitely concerning, because you could put all kinds of legislation in place. I don't care what state you're in. You could be in Alabama or Mississippi. But if your local school district has this prevailing idea that no matter what happens, I don't care what the governor of the state tells me, I don't care what my state legislature tells me, if this person is ideologically driven and motivated, if they are bent towards certain outcomes like trans normativity, normalizing this gender ideology cult, this queer theory, if they're towards the normalization of that, they're not going to counsel a boy or a girl to heteronormativity. No. Listen, you might be confused. There might be autism. Somebody's on the spectrum. It might be ADHD. My wife, she was very athletic. She was kind of a tomboy, right? She was a college athlete, played soccer. Beautiful woman, by the way. And so, but if she lived in this time, who knows what kind of counsel they would have given her in middle school and so on and so forth. So you think about the way in which people are thinking, the prevailing doctrine or the prevailing ideology. if they're bent towards trans normativity, then they're going to say, no matter what, oh, well, you just need to go this direction. We're going to counsel you this way. We're not going to counsel you to, to wait or to wait until puberty or to wait until you're 18 or 19 or 20. Instead, they're going to be pushing this other direction. Am I wrong?
No, you're not. And what's important for people to understand is this ideology has infiltrated every aspect of our culture. So even if we have laws in place to protect minors from these irreversible medical interventions, they are still being brainwashed with the ideology itself. It is in our children's programming. It's in their video games. It is in social media, TikTok, YouTube, Discord. So it's going to take some time to undo the damage that's been done. Because even if we protect minors, what about the 18 and 19-year-olds? Fundamentally, this entire movement is based on a lie. And when you hear detransitioners talk, they always say not only were they fast-tracked to this medicalization path, but no one explored any kind of underlying issues. And as my daughter was going through this, and it is a hellish experience for any parent to watch their child self-destruct in this nature, and then watch our society cheer them on. Because what the schools are really doing is they are affirming a child's self-hate. Thankfully, my daughter is on the other side of this confusion now, but she still to this day bears internal scars of what that affirmation did to her. And so we have a war ahead of us. The laws are not enough. We have to be fighting this ideology. We have to be protecting, safeguarding, and inoculating, especially young children, from these lies. Because what happens is these detransitioners, God bless them, they go through all the interventions. They take the hormones and they realize, if you're a young woman, I'm never going to become a man. That is not possible. And there are a lot of parallels between gender dysphoria and the disassociation from one's sex body and anorexia. Would we affirm someone with anorexia and tell them they're correct in their negative self-perception and give them diet pills for liposuction? Because that's what they did to Prisha Mosley. She had an active eating disorder. They would not give her liposuction, but they cut her breast off. This is unthinkable that this is the state of medicine right now in our country.
Yeah, I totally agree with you that legally, you can create sort of these firewall protections. It's kind of like your first line of defense, but it doesn't, if all you have is a law in place, but you have a DA or you have a mayor or you have a teachers union or a superintendent, if they want to skirt around that, they'll defy the law. And they say, well, come arrest me. And we know oftentimes that doesn't happen. We have to win the hearts and the minds of the next generation. It really is about a battle for the mind, for the soul of that child, that son or that daughter. In the aftermath, and just this is probably more of a personal question, but as your daughter went through this and now she's come out on the other side, is she angry at how she was counseled? Is she mad at those people that were kind of leading her astray? What's her sense of all of this as she's walked through it?
Well, absolutely. She has some righteous anger. There's a lot of shame that she's still working through. I am fiercely protected over her story. I mean, that's hers to tell one day. I really speak about this from a parent perspective. And now I help parents walk their children and parent their children through this confusion. But it's really important that parents know that they are not alone, that there are resources available today, so many more than were available in 2020. And they can get those resources at donoharmmedicine.org under our gender ideology resources page.
Since 1971, Liberty University has had one mission: training champions for Christ. We've been at this for a while, and in the shadow of the Blue Ridge Mountains, we have grown to be a global force. Today, Liberty runs over 100,000 students around the globe, studying across 15 colleges and schools.
And among them, over 30,000 military students.
Across 700 programs of study, we train as one: nurses, artists, business leaders of the future and today. Together, we work to give back through service trips, local community work, and over 500,000 volunteer hours per year. And we play just as hard as we study, with 20 NCAA athletic programs and 40 club sports teams. So, who are we? We are Liberty University, and we train champions for Christ.
Yeah, no, very, very helpful. I do want to, as we kind of wind this down, first of all, I want to thank you so much for your boldness and for sharing your story. And I know there are other parents out there that have experienced similar things and don't really have that opportunity. But how would you counsel, I guess, those who might be out there that are fearful? I think about the fact that there are some people that are living in places, January, where the courts are against them. They're under the threat of law that their children, their custody of their children might be taken away from them. There are states right now in which those laws are in place. I think it's a cajole against parents to stay quiet, to silence them, to suppress them, so that they can just allow the local schools to do whatever they will. It's a law of predation that takes parental rights away. But what counsel would you give to those who might be listening, might be fearful?
So I speak to parents all over the country, and the most heartbreaking conversations are with parents that are in states like California, Oregon, Washington, Colorado, Massachusetts, Wisconsin, where their parental rights are not honored. And not only that, if you do not affirm this false identity in your child and you want to protect your child from medical interventions, they will take your child away. And so it is very important that parents stand up against this, pull your children from schools that do not respect you as the ultimate authority, and find other like-minded parents and vote these people out. I have helped parents to move states. It's that serious, because if you have a child indoctrinated into this false belief system, it is very difficult to get them on the other side of this. It takes a lot of radical steps as parents. A lot of parents don't want to hear that initially, but it does. It takes radical steps because this is a radical ideology that has gotten hold of your child. And so I wish I had better news. I wish I had, a magic advice or a book that you could read, but that's just not the case. The best advice I can give to parents is to pull your child from any space where they are being influenced by trans influencers. That may be friends, that may be a guidance counselor or an activist teacher. And then you have to lean into that relationship that you have with your child. Repair anything that's broken, because you cannot even begin to plant seeds or impact any kind of change in your child until that relationship is restored and healthy.
Yeah, very, very well said. I do also just want to talk about, to those that are Christian leaders, pastors, those who have influence over churches that speak from platforms. Have you had anyone from, I would say church communities reach out to you? Have you had any pastors specifically that have responded to your story, have given you encouragement, and even have lent their platform to have you come and speak?
Absolutely. And that is outside the scope of Do No Harm. So in my personal capacity, I have talked to many churches and pastors, but we have got to get pastors off the sideline. And I co-authored a guide to do just that. It's called the Church Transgender Response Guide. You can get it from childparentrights.org under resources. And this is a resource that is almost 100 pages long. It is meant for both pastors and parents to get them engaged on this issue and know how to protect their children from this destructive ideology. It is critical that pastors get off the sidelines and start preaching truth from the pulpit courageously, because if children are not hearing the truth in church, where are they going to hear it? They are not going to hear it in school, and they are certainly not going to hear it out in our society right now.
Yeah, amen. I think more and more rides on what's coming from pulpits on a Sunday morning. Gone are the days where you say, well, just preach the gospel. Yes, amen. Preach the gospel, preach the word in season, out of season, right? But it is so important that, unfortunately, where are they going to get the information when it comes to news? Where are they going to get the information with regards to culture and history? Where are they going to get the information with regards to ethics, right? And understanding of sexual ethics? It's going to have to come from a faithful pastor who is faithfully preaching the word of God from a pulpit at a local church. So pastors have to stand up courageous in this moment. I'm just going to give a final word. We had a conversation not too long ago with James Lindsay, author of one of those books I think you mentioned, The Queering of the American Child. And, one of the things we had talked about is, I hear from parents say all the time, over my dead body, this wouldn't happen. I'm not going to let this happen to my kids. And James, rather astutely observed, he said, it doesn't require you to die, but it might require you to forfeit a second income. Are you willing to do that? And there are a lot of parents today, they're going to have to decide. It's not right now a call to die, but it might be a call to forfeit a second income or something. And are you willing to be impacted in your wallet in order to rescue your child from a school that is preying upon them? And so we need to encourage parents out there. They can do this. There are resources available. It doesn't require you to give up your life, but it may your livelihood. And that is important.
Yeah, this ideology brings parents to their knees. And I got to a point in this experience where I would have given up everything to have my daughter back. And honestly, that's what it takes. You have to get to that point of knowing everything is on the line. You must do everything you can to save your child. And that is where I help parents where they're at to understand the serious nature of this issue. And they have to fight for their child. And that's why I tell parents, do not wait until this ideology comes into your home. And the other thing that James talks about, as do I, is even if your child is not vulnerable to becoming trans-identified, they are being trained to be an ally. Do not think your family will not be impacted by this ideology in some way, shape, or form. You already see freedom of speech being curbed in our schools. And if Biden and Kamala's Title IX changes are instituted, all children across the board will be adversely impacted by this change.
Amen. Well said. January Littlejohn, thank you so much for joining the Give Me Liberty podcast. We appreciate you coming on. Thank you for sharing your story. It's a courageous one.
Thank you.
God bless you.
Thank you for having me. God bless you.
Hey, did you find this helpful? I hope you did. Please like and subscribe, share with a friend, and also go to standingforfreedom.com where you can find more content, articles, podcasts, and our Theology of Politics series, all at standingforfreedom.com.